The morning air was crisp as 17-year-old Jerome packed his small backpack for the third time. His hands shook slightly, not from the cold, but from pure excitement mixed with nerves. Today was the day he would board his very first airplane. After 2 years of working part-time at Mr. Peterson's corner grocery store, counting every dollar and saving every penny, he finally had enough money to visit his grandmother in Los Angeles. Jerome's mother, Linda, watched from the kitchen doorway as her son carefully folded his only good shirt. She had worked double shifts at the diner for months, secretly adding to his travel fund whenever she could spare a few dollars. Neither of them mentioned it, but they both knew this trip meant everything to Jerome. His grandmother had been asking him to visit for years, and at 82, she wasn't getting any younger. "You sure you got everything, baby?" Linda asked, her voice trying to hide the worry she felt about her son traveling alone for the first time. Jerome nodded, shouldering his worn backpack. "Yes, Mama, and I got the emergency 20 you slipped in my jacket pocket too." He smiled, and Linda couldn't help but laugh. Nothing got past her boy. The bus ride to the airport felt like it took forever. Jerome pressed his face against the window, watching the city change from familiar neighborhoods to unfamiliar highways. His stomach was doing flips, but the good kind. He pulled out his phone and read his grandmother's text for the 100th time. "Can't wait to see my grandson. Been cooking your favorites all week." At the airport, everything was bigger and busier than Jerome had imagined. People rushed past him with expensive suitcases, talking on phones about business deals and vacation plans. He felt small in his thrift store jeans and sneakers, but he kept his head up. His mother had always taught him that respect wasn't about what you wore, but how you carried yourself. The security line moved slowly, and Jerome watched nervously as other passengers seemed to breeze through the process. When his turn came, the TSA agent looked at his ID and boarding pass, then at Jerome, then back at the documents. "First time flying?" the agent asked with a kind smile. "Yes, sir," Jerome replied honestly. "Well, you picked a good day for it. Clear skies ahead." The agent stamped his boarding pass and waved him through. Jerome found his gate and sat down, pulling out the sandwich his mother had packed. Around him, people talked loudly on phones, complaining about delayed flights and missed connections. He noticed a couple sitting in the first-class boarding area. The man wore an expensive suit and kept checking his Rolex, while his wife sat quietly beside him, one hand resting on her noticeably pregnant belly. The woman looked tired. Jerome thought, not just regular tired, but the kind of tired that comes from carrying extra weight and worry. Her husband was busy on a phone call, talking about stock prices and merger deals, but she seemed lost in her own thoughts. Every few minutes she would shift uncomfortably in her seat. "Now boarding Group A, first-class passengers," the gate agent announced. Jerome watched as the pregnant woman struggled slightly to stand up. Her husband was still on his phone, walking ahead of her toward the boarding gate. Jerome almost stood up to help her, but she managed on her own, giving him a small smile as she passed. When Jerome's group was finally called, he found himself walking down the narrow airplane aisle for the first time in his life. The first-class section looked like something from a movie, with wide leather seats and passengers already being served drinks in real glasses. He kept walking toward the back, checking his boarding pass twice to make sure he found the right. So his seat was 23F, a window seat, which made him happy. The middle seat was empty, but the aisle seat was occupied by a businessman who barely looked up from his laptop when Jerome squeezed past. Jerome pressed his face to the small window, amazed at how tiny the cars looked below as they taxied toward the runway. The safety demonstration seemed important, so Jerome paid close attention, even though most other passengers ignored it. He watched carefully as the flight attendant showed how to use the oxygen masks and life vests. His mother had always told him to pay attention to safety instructions, whether it was at work or anywhere else. "You never know when you might need to help somebody," she used to say. As the plane lifted off the ground, Jerome felt his stomach drop in the most amazing way. He was actually flying. He was actually doing something he had dreamed about since he was little, watching planes cross the sky above his neighborhood. The city got smaller and smaller until it looked like a toy model, and then they were above the clouds. About an hour into the flight, Jerome noticed some commotion toward the front of the plane. A flight attendant walked quickly past him looking worried. Then another one followed. Other passengers started turning in their seats trying to see what was happening. Jerome unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up slightly, trying to get a better view. That's when he saw her, the pregnant woman from the gate. She was bent over in her seat and her husband was standing beside her looking panicked. Even from several rows away, Jerome could tell something was seriously wrong. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, trying to stay calm, but Jerome could hear the urgency underneath. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a medical emergency. If there are any doctors or medical professionals on board, please press your call button immediately. Jerome looked around the cabin. No call buttons were lighting up. No one was moving. The businessman next to him just put his headphones on and went back to his laptop. Other passengers were whispering to each other or trying to crane their necks to see what was happening, but no one was actually doing anything. From his seat, Jerome could see the pregnant woman more clearly now. She was doubled over, and he could see that she was crying. Her husband kept running his hands through his hair, looking more helpless than Jerome had ever seen a grown man look. The flight attendants were trying to help, but they looked just as scared and unsure as everyone else. That's when Jerome remembered the first aid course he had taken at the community center last year. Mrs. Rodriguez, the instructor, had made all the kids practice different emergency scenarios. She had talked about pregnancy complications and what to look for. She had said that sometimes the most important thing wasn't knowing everything, but knowing enough to help until real help could arrive. Jerome's heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was pounding because every instinct in his body was telling him to move, to do something, to help. His mother's voice echoed in his head. You never know when you might need to help somebody. He stood up fully now, his decision made. The businessman beside him finally looked up from his laptop. Sit down, kid. It's not your problem. But Jerome was already moving toward the front of the plane. It wasn't about whether it was his problem or not. Someone needed help, and he might be able to give it. As he walked down the aisle, he could feel other passengers watching him, some with curiosity, others with doubt. A 17-year-old kid from the back of the plane, walking toward a crisis that had stumped the adults. Jerome didn't care what they thought. All he cared about was the woman who was in pain and the baby who might be in danger. He had learned something valuable in his 17 years. Sometimes the most unlikely person is exactly the right person for the job. Jerome's legs felt shaky as he walked down the narrow aisle, but he kept moving forward. The closer he got to the front of the plane, the more he could hear the pregnant woman's quiet sobs. Her husband was kneeling beside her seat, holding her hand and saying things like, "It's going to be okay," and "Just breathe." But his voice was shaking too. When Jerome reached their row, the flight attendant looked up at him with tired eyes. Her name tag read Patricia, and she looked like she had been flying for 20 years. But even she seemed lost right now. "Honey, you need to go back to your seat," Patricia said gently. "We're handling this." "Ma'am, I know some first aid," Jerome said quietly. "I took a course at my community center. Maybe I can help until we find a doctor." The husband looked up at Jerome for the first time. His expensive suit was wrinkled now and his face was red with worry. "You're just a kid," he said, not mean but desperate. "My wife needs real help." Jerome understood why the man was scared. If Jerome was in his shoes, he might feel the same way. But looking at the pregnant woman, he could see she was getting worse, not better. Her face was pale, and she was breathing in short, quick gasps. "Sir, what's your wife's name?" Jerome asked, crouching down beside them. "Victoria," the husband answered, confused by the question. Jerome looked directly at Victoria. "Hi, Victoria. I'm Jerome. Can you tell me what you're feeling right now? Where does it hurt?" Victoria looked at this teenager who seemed so calm when everyone else was panicking. It's my stomach," she whispered. "And my back. It feels like something is tearing inside me." Jerome nodded. Those were some of the warning signs Mrs. Rodriguez had taught them about. "When did the pain start?" he asked. "About 10 minutes ago," Victoria said. "It came on so fast. 1 minute I was fine, and then—" She winced as another wave of pain hit her. "Okay, Victoria, I need you to try to breathe slowly with me," Jerome said. He had watched Mrs. Rodriguez do this same thing during practice. "In through your nose, out through your mouth, can you do that?" While Victoria tried to control her breathing, Jerome looked at Patricia. "Ma'am, I need you to get me some pillows and blankets, and can you ask the pilot if we can land somewhere soon?" "We're already working on an emergency landing," Patricia said, "but the closest airport is still 40 minutes away." Jerome felt his heart sink, but he didn't let it show on his face. 40 minutes was a long time when someone was in medical trouble. He turned back to Victoria. "Victoria, I'm going to ask you some questions, okay? Has this happened before during your pregnancy?" "No," she said between breaths. "Everything has been normal. The doctor said everything was fine at my last checkup. How far along are you?" 7 months, her husband answered for her. "We tried for years to have a baby. The doctor said it might never happen, and then—" His voice broke a little. Jerome could see how scared they both were. This wasn't just any baby to them. This was their miracle baby, and now something was going terribly wrong. "Sir, what's your name?" Jerome asked the husband. "Robert," he replied. "Okay, Robert, I need you to help me help Victoria. Can you sit behind her and support her back? She needs to be sitting up a little more." Robert did what Jerome asked without questioning it. Jerome was amazed at how much calmer he felt when he focused on what needed to be done, instead of how scared he was inside. Jerome gently pressed his hand on Victoria's belly, the way Mrs. Rodriguez had shown them. Victoria's stomach felt hard as a rock, which wasn't a good sign. In the first aid class, they had learned that this could mean the baby was in distress. "Patricia," Jerome called to the flight attendant, "can you bring me some water and see if there's a first aid kit?" "There's a first aid kit, but it just has basic supplies," Patricia said, hurrying to get what he asked for. Jerome looked around the first-class cabin. Other passengers were watching from their seats, some recording with their phones, others just staring. He wished they would stop treating this like entertainment and start helping, but he pushed that thought away. He had to focus on Victoria. "Victoria, I need you to tell me if the pain gets worse or if you feel dizzy," Jerome said. "And I need you to keep breathing with me, in and out, slow and steady." For the next few minutes, Jerome stayed right beside Victoria, monitoring her breathing and watching for any changes. He had her husband time the pains, which seemed to be coming in waves every few minutes. That was another warning sign from his first aid training. "Jerome," Victoria said softly, "how old are you?" 17, he answered honestly. "You're so young to know all this," she said. "Where did you learn?" "My community center back home in Detroit," Jerome said. "They taught us first aid because they said you never know when someone might need help. I guess they were right." Robert looked at Jerome with new eyes. "You're from Detroit?" "Yes, sir. Born and raised. And you're flying alone?" "Going to see my grandmother in LA. It's my first time on a plane." Robert shook his head in amazement. Here was this kid, probably from a completely different world than theirs, using his first airplane ride to save his wife's life. Patricia came back with the first aid kit and some bottled water. Jerome looked through the supplies. There wasn't much there that would help with a pregnancy emergency, but he found some items he could use. "Victoria, I'm going to put this cold compress on your forehead," he said. "It might help you feel a little better." As Jerome worked, he kept talking to Victoria, asking her about the baby, about how excited she and Robert were to be parents. He had learned in his first aid class that keeping someone calm and distracted could sometimes be just as important as the medical stuff. "We're going to name him David," Victoria said, managing a small smile despite her pain. "That's a strong name," Jerome said. "David's going to be lucky to have parents like you two." 20 minutes into the emergency, Jerome noticed that Victoria's pain seemed to be getting a little better. Her breathing was more normal, and some color was coming back to her face. "How are you feeling now?" he asked. "Better, I think," Victoria said. The pain isn't as sharp. Jerome felt a wave of relief, but he knew they weren't out of danger yet. They still needed to get to a hospital, and anything could change before then. The pilot says we'll be landing in Denver in 15 minutes, Patricia announced. There's an ambulance waiting for us. Jerome nodded and kept monitoring Victoria. For those last 15 minutes, he didn't leave her side. He held her hand when the pain came back, helped her breathe through the worst moments, and kept reassuring both her and Robert that everything was going to be okay. When the plane finally touched down in Denver, Jerome felt like he could breathe, again for the first time in an hour. But his job wasn't done yet. He stayed with Victoria and Robert until the paramedics came on board and took over her care. As they wheeled Victoria off the plane, she grabbed Jerome's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved us." Jerome squeezed her hand gently. "You're going to be fine," he said. "Both of you." Jerome sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair in the hospital waiting room, his hands still shaking slightly from everything that had happened. He kept replaying the last hour in his mind, wondering if he had done everything right. The ambulance ride to Denver General Hospital had been a blur of flashing lights and medical equipment, but Victoria had seemed stable when they wheeled her into the emergency room. Robert paced back and forth across the small waiting area, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Every few minutes he would stop and look toward the doors where the doctors had taken his wife, then start pacing again. Jerome had never seen a grown man look so helpless. "You don't have to stay here," Robert said to Jerome for the third time. "I'm sure you want to catch another flight to see your grandmother." Jerome shook his head. "I'm not leaving until I know Victoria and the baby are okay." The truth was, Jerome had already called his grandmother and explained what happened. She had cried on the phone and told him how proud she was that he had helped someone in need. "Your grandfather would have done the same thing," she had said. "You come when you can, baby. That woman needs you more than I do right now." A nurse walked past them and Robert jumped up. "Excuse me, do you know anything about my wife, Victoria Chen? She was brought in about an hour ago." The nurse smiled, kindly, but shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't have any updates yet. The doctor will come speak with you as soon as they know more." Robert slumped back into his chair, running his hands through his hair. Jerome could see that this man, who probably controlled million-dollar business deals every day, felt completely out of control right now. "Tell me about Detroit," Robert said suddenly, probably trying to distract himself from worrying. Jerome wasn't sure why Robert wanted to know, but he figured talking was better than sitting in silence. "It's home," he said simply. "People say a lot of bad things about Detroit, but there's good people there too. My mom works at Sullivan's Diner on 8 Mile Road. Been there for 12 years. Just your mom?" Robert asked gently. "Yeah, just us. My dad left when I was 8. Mom says it's his loss." Jerome smiled a little. "She worked 2 jobs for a while to save up for this trip. I've been wanting to see my grandma for years, but we never had the money." Robert was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do after high school?" "I want to be a doctor," Jerome said without hesitation. "Ever since I was little, I wanted to help people feel better. That's why I took the first aid class at the community center. Mrs. Rodriguez, she runs the program, she said knowledge is something nobody can ever take away from you." "Medical school is expensive," Robert said carefully. Jerome nodded. "I know. I got good grades, so maybe I can get some scholarships. And I'll work and save up money. It might take me longer than other people, but I'll get there eventually." Robert looked at this 17-year-old kid who had just saved his wife's life, talking about his dreams with such quiet determination. He thought about his own son, who would probably grow up with every advantage money could buy, and wondered if that boy would ever have the kind of character he was seeing in Jerome. "Mr. Chen?" A doctor in scrubs appeared in the doorway, and Robert jumped to his feet so fast, he almost knocked over his chair. "Yes, that's me. How is my wife? How's the baby?" The doctor smiled, and Jerome felt his whole body relax. Good news usually came with smiles. "Your wife is stable, and so is your son," the doctor said. "She had what we call a placental abruption. It's when the placenta starts to separate from the wall of the uterus. It can be very dangerous if not treated quickly. Robert's face went pale. Dangerous how? Well, if it had gone on much longer without treatment, we could have lost both mom and baby, the doctor said. But the good news is that someone on that airplane knew exactly what to do, keeping her calm, monitoring her symptoms, getting her positioned correctly. All of that probably saved their lives. The doctor looked over at Jerome. I'm assuming that someone was you? Jerome felt his cheeks get hot. I just remembered what they taught us in first aid class. Well, whatever they taught you, it worked, the doctor said. You should be very proud. Not many people would have stayed that calm under pressure. Can I see her? Robert asked. She's resting now, but yes, you can go in. Just for a few minutes, though. The doctor turned to Jerome. She's been asking for you too, young man. She wants to thank you properly. They followed the doctor down a long hallway, filled with the sounds of beeping machines and quiet conversations. Jerome had never been inside a hospital before, and everything seemed so clean and bright and serious. Victoria was lying in a bed, connected to several monitors, but she looked so much better than she had on the airplane. Her color was back to normal, and she was smiling when they walked in. Jerome, she said, trying to sit up a little. Come here. Jerome walked over to her bed, feeling awkward. He had never been thanked by someone whose life he might have saved. Before. The doctor told me what you did, Victoria said, taking his hand. He said if you hadn't helped me on the plane, we might have lost the baby. I just did what anyone would do, Jerome said quietly. No, Robert said firmly. That's not true. There were 200 people on that plane, and you were the only one who helped. Most of them just sat there watching or taking pictures with their phones. Victoria squeezed Jerome's hand. The doctor said you probably learned all that from a community program? Jerome nodded. The East Side Community Center. They got programs for kids in the neighborhood, computer classes, tutoring, first aid, job training. Mrs. Rodriguez always says they're trying to give kids opportunities so we can make something of ourselves. Tell me more about this community center, Robert said, pulling his chair closer to the bed. Jerome wasn't sure why Robert was so interested, but he told them about the center. How it was in an old building that used to be a factory, but volunteers had fixed it up. How they served free meals to kids after school and helped with homework. How they had a small library where Jerome used to go read medical books. Sounds like an amazing place, Victoria said. It is, Jerome said. But they're always struggling for money. Mrs. Rodriguez is always worrying about keeping the lights on or whether they'll have enough food for the kids. She says programs like ours are the first to get cut when the city runs out of money. Jerome didn't know why he was telling them all this. Maybe it was because they seemed genuinely interested, or maybe because he was still running on adrenaline from everything that had happened. This Mrs. Rodriguez sounds like a special person, Robert said. She is. She grew up in the neighborhood too. Could have left and never come back, but she stayed to help kids like me. She says every kid deserves a chance to succeed no matter where they come from. A nurse came in to check on Victoria, and the doctor said they should let her rest. As they prepared to leave, Victoria called Jerome back over. I don't know how to thank you for what you did today, she said. You don't need to thank me, Jerome replied. I'm just glad you and the baby are okay. But as they walked back to the waiting room, Jerome could see that Robert was thinking about something. The man had gotten very quiet, and he kept looking at Jerome like he was trying to figure something out. Jerome checked his phone and saw that he had missed several calls from his mother. He called her back and explained everything that had happened. She cried and said she was proud of him, but she also worried about him missing his flight and spending money on a hotel room. Don't worry about the money, baby, she said. You did the right thing. Your grandma understands. When Jerome hung up, Robert was watching him again. Jerome, Robert said slowly. What you did today, helping my wife, that took real courage. But what impressed me even more was listening to you talk about your dreams, your family, that community center. You're not like most 17-year-olds. I know. Jerome wasn't sure what to say to that, so he just nodded. I want to do something to thank you, Robert continued. You don't need to do anything, Mr. Chen, really. But Robert was already shaking his head. Yes, I do. What you did today changed everything for me and Victoria. Our son is going to be born because of you. I have to do something. Jerome could see that Robert was serious, but he felt uncomfortable with the idea of getting a reward for helping someone. That wasn't why he had done it. He had helped because it was the right thing to do, because someone needed help, and because that's how his mother had raised him. Little did Jerome know that what he was about to say next would change not just his own life, but the lives of countless other kids just like him. 3 days had passed since the emergency on the airplane, and Jerome was still in Denver. He had called the airline and explained the situation, and they had been understanding about changing his flight to Los Angeles. His grandmother had insisted he stay until he knew Victoria and the baby were completely safe. Jerome spent most of his time at the hospital, even though Robert kept telling him he didn't need to. The truth was, Jerome felt connected to this family now. He had been there during one of the most scared moments of their lives, and somehow that created a bond he couldn't easily walk away from. Victoria was doing much better. The doctors said she would need to stay on bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy, but both she and baby David were healthy. Every time Jerome visited, she seemed a little stronger and a lot more grateful. On the 3rd day, Robert asked Jerome to join him for lunch in the hospital cafeteria. They sat at a small table by the window eating sandwiches that tasted like cardboard, but neither of them seemed to care about the food. Jerome, I've been thinking a lot about what happened, Robert said, setting down his sandwich. About what you did for my family? Jerome felt uncomfortable whenever people talked about what he had done. Mr. Chen, really, anyone would have helped. Stop saying that, Robert said, but not harshly. I've been successful in business for 20 years, and I've learned to read people. What you did was special, but more than that, who you are is special. Jerome looked down at his hands. He wasn't used to compliments like this, especially from someone like Robert who seemed to have everything figured out. I want to give you something, Robert continued. Money for college or for your family or whatever you need. Jerome looked up quickly. No, sir, I can't take money from you. Why not? Because I didn't help your wife to get paid for it. Jerome said simply, I helped because she needed help. Taking money for it would make it feel wrong. Robert stared at Jerome for a long moment. In his world, everyone had a price. Every favor came with expectations. Every good deed had an angle. But here was this kid, turning down what could probably solve all his family's financial problems, because he thought it was the right thing to do. You know what, Jerome? That's exactly why I want to help you, Robert said. Because you don't want me to? They sat in silence for a few minutes, both of them thinking. Jerome was wrestling with something in his mind and Robert could see it. Mr. Chen, Jerome said finally, can I ask you something? Of course. You really want to do something to thank me? More than anything. Jerome took a deep breath. This was harder than helping Victoria on the airplane, because this required him to ask for something, and he had never been good at asking for help. There is something, Jerome said quietly, but it's not for me. Robert leaned forward, interested. You remember I told you about the Eastside Community Center back home? The place where I learned first aid? Robert nodded. They're in trouble. Mr. Chen. Bad trouble. Mrs. Rodriguez called me yesterday and said they might have to close down next month. The city cut their funding and they don't have enough money to keep the programs running. Jerome's voice got stronger as he talked about the center. There's about 60 kids who go there every day after school. Some of them, it's the only place they get a hot meal. Others, it's where they do their homework because they don't have a quiet place at home. And the programs, like the first aid class, they teach us things that might save someone's life someday. Robert was listening carefully, but Jerome couldn't tell what he was thinking. If that place closes, those kids don't have anywhere else to go, Jerome continued. Some of them will probably end up on the streets or getting into trouble, or just giving up on school altogether. Mrs. Rodriguez has been running that place for 15 years, using her own money when she has to, but she can't do it anymore. Jerome paused, feeling his heart beating fast. He had never asked anyone for anything this big before. So if you really want to thank me for helping Victoria, Could you maybe help the community center instead? I know it's a lot of money, but those kids need it more than I do. Robert was quiet for so long that Jerome started to worry he had asked for too much. Maybe Robert thought he was being greedy or taking advantage of the situation. How much money does the center need? Robert asked finally. Mrs. Rodriguez said they need about $50,000 to stay open for the rest of the year. I know. That's a lot of money. Jerome, Robert interrupted, and his voice sounded strange. Look at me. Jerome looked up and was shocked to see that Robert's eyes were wet with tears. Are you okay, Mr. Chen? Robert wiped his eyes and shook his head in amazement. Do you realize what you just did? Jerome was confused. What do you mean? I just offered to give you money that could pay for your entire college education. Money that could change your life forever. And instead, you asked me to help 60 kids you grew up with. Jerome still didn't understand why Robert was so emotional about it. Jerome, in my world, people step on each other to get ahead. They look out for themselves first, second, and third. I've seen people betray their best friends for a lot less money than I just offered you. Robert leaned across the table. But you're 17 years old. You come from a family that struggles to pay the bills. You've probably never had many opportunities handed to you. And when someone offers to change your life, you think about other people instead. Jerome felt his cheeks getting warm. Those kids are like family to me, Mr. Chen. We all grew up together. Mrs. Rodriguez, she's like a grandmother to all of us. I can't take something for myself knowing they might lose, the only safe place they have. That's when Robert really started crying. Not loud crying, but quiet tears rolling down his cheeks. Jerome had never seen a grown man cry before except for his uncle at his grandfather's funeral. I'm sorry, Robert said, wiping his face with a napkin. It's just, Victoria and I have been trying to have a baby for 8 years. We've spent so much money on treatments, on doctors, on everything. And we always wondered what kind of person our child would grow up to be. Robert looked directly at Jerome. If our son grows up to be half the man you are, we'll consider ourselves the luckiest parents in the world. Jerome didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. Jerome, I'm going to help your community center, Robert said, but I'm not just going to give them $50,000 to stay open for a year. Jerome's heart sank. Maybe Robert had changed his mind. I'm going to give them enough money to stay open for the next 10 years, and I'm going to help them expand their programs, hire more teachers, serve more kids. Because if that place created someone like you, then it's doing something very, very right. Jerome stared at Robert, not sure he had heard correctly. Are you serious? Dead serious. But there's one condition. Jerome's stomach dropped. What condition? You have to let me pay for your college too. Mr. Chen, I told you, I know what you told me. But here's the thing, Jerome. You can help a lot more people as a doctor than you can help working at a grocery store. Your community center taught you to help people, right? Jerome nodded. Then the best way to honor what they taught you is to become the best doctor you can be. And then you can go back and teach other kids what you've learned. Jerome felt overwhelmed. This was more than he had ever dreamed possible. Not just for himself, but for all the kids at the center. I don't know what to say, Jerome whispered. Say yes, Robert replied. Say yes, and then promise me that when you're a successful doctor, you'll remember where you came from. Remember the community center that shaped you. Remember that sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone else. Jerome looked at this man who had been a complete stranger 4 days ago, and who was now offering to change not just his life, but the lives of 60 other kids back home. Yes, Jerome said, his voice barely audible. Yes, and I promise. Robert reached across the table and shook Jerome's hand. Then let's go tell Victoria. She's going to be so happy. As they walked back toward Victoria's room, Jerome felt like he was floating. But more than that, he felt like he understood something important about life. Sometimes when you help someone else without expecting anything in return, the universe finds a way to help you back in ways you never could have imagined. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is ask for help for someone other than yourself.